The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss. Minji Park stepped out and stared at the biggest space station she had ever seen. The Galactic Council station stretched out in front of her like a metal city floating among the stars. Towers twisted up into the darkness. Bridges connected different sections with streams of light flowing between them. Ships from hundreds of worlds docked at ports that dotted the station like glowing windows. Minji pulled her small black bag over her shoulder and walked forward. She wore a simple dark suit that looked plain next to the colorful robes and shining armor of the other beings around her. Her tablet computer was old by galactic standards. She carried no weapons and brought no assistance. Earth had sent one person to represent all of humanity at the most important meeting in the galaxy. The corridors buzzed with activity. Tall crystal beings called Velkari walked past her, their bodies catching light like living diamonds. Bug-like Thakran moved in perfect groups, making clicking sounds to each other. Dozens of other alien species filled the walkways. Some had too many arms. Others had no arms at all. A few floated instead of walking. None of them paid attention to the small human woman walking among them. Minji was used to being ignored. Home on Earth, she had been a military analyst before becoming a diplomat. Her job was to watch and understand things that others missed. Being overlooked was often helpful in that work. She found her way to the registration area after taking several wrong turns. The station was enormous. Transport tubes carried beings from one section to another. Signs in hundreds of languages pointed in different directions. Everything was designed for species much larger than humans. The registration clerk was a green creature with 6 eyes that moved independently. It looked at her with obvious boredom. Name and homeworld, it said in a flat voice. Minji Park from Earth. The clerk's eyes swiveled to check its computer screen. Earth. New species. Observer status only. It handed her a small device. Section, SID 99. Back row, seat 247. The device will translate languages and give you directions. Opening session starts in 2 hours. Observer species cannot vote and have limited speaking time. Minji thanked the clerk and followed the directions on her device. She walked through corridor after corridor, taking transport tubes deeper into the station. The decorations became simpler as she traveled. The crowds grew thinner. By the time she reached Section Z, she was almost alone. The council chamber took her breath away. It was a huge circular room with thousands of seats arranged in curved rows rising up like a giant bowl. At the center sat a speaking platform surrounded by holographic projectors that could display images from anywhere in the galaxy. The ceiling was clear glass showing stars and colorful gas clouds. The front rows were filling with the most important delegates. Their seats were wide and comfortable with personal control panels and food service stations. Minji watched a tall Velkari named Kazthul settle into a front row seat. His crystal body reflected the chamber lights like a living rainbow. The middle rows held species that had been part of galactic civilization for hundreds of years. They talked to each other in small groups, clearly comfortable with the politics and procedures of the council. Minji climbed the steep stairs to the back section. The seats here were smaller and simpler. Most were empty. She found seat 247 and sat down. From this distance, the speaking platform looked tiny. The important delegates in the front rows were just colored dots far below. She understood immediately why Earth had been placed so far away. They wanted humans out of sight and out of mind. Minji opened her tablet and began taking detailed notes. She counted delegations and observed their positions. She watched which species sat together and which ones kept apart. She noticed the informal conversations in the front rows and saw which delegates were included or excluded from different groups. This was what Earth's government had chosen her for this mission. Her military training had taught her to see patterns that others missed. A musical tone announced the start of the session. The chamber lights dimmed except around the central platform. A tall, blue-skinned being with silver hair stepped forward. This was moderator Yisung, one of the most powerful political figures in known space. "Welcome, honored delegates, to this special session," Yisung announced. His voice carried clearly to every seat. "Today we discuss a great opportunity for our expanding civilization." A massive holographic star map appeared above the platform. It showed a section of the galaxy that Minji did not recognize. The image zoomed in to reveal star systems, planets, and asteroid fields, rich with valuable resources. The outer spiral, territories. Yesung continued. Our surveys confirm vast resources and excellent colonization conditions. Most importantly, these regions appear undefended and ready for immediate expansion. Excited voices filled the front and middle rows. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, clearly interested in claiming pieces of this new territory. Senator Kazthul stood up in the front row. When he spoke, his voice had a musical quality that matched his crystal body. The Velkari Republic. Request priority colonization rights. Our analysis shows these territories could support over 200 new colony worlds. Other delegates rose to make similar claims. The Thakran wanted mining rights to asteroid fields. The Nexari Alliance was interested in gas giants rich with energy. Each species seemed to have already planned how to divide the territory. Minji studied the star charts on her tablet, comparing them to the holographic display. She accessed Earth's astronomical databases and cross-referenced stellar positions. Something about this situation bothered her, but she could not identify what. While she worked, some delegates in the middle rows glanced back at her. They seemed amused by the sight of the lone human sitting so far away, working on her small tablet while major powers discussed dividing up star systems. She heard one make a comment in an untranslated language, followed by laughter. Another pointed at her and clearly made a dismissive remark about humans and their place in galactic society. Minji continued taking notes. She had been underestimated before. During her military service, enemy forces often dismissed Earth's small fleet right up until human tactics proved them wrong. The debate went on for hours. Map after map appeared showing resource projections, shipping routes, and colonization plans. Every major species wanted their share of the outer spiral territories. The question was not whether they should take these regions, but how to divide them fairly among the galactic powers. Finally, Minji raised her hand. The chamber gradually became quiet as delegates noticed the small human in the back requesting to speak. Many looked surprised as if they had forgotten she was there. Some seemed annoyed that their important discussion was being interrupted by an observer from such a minor species. Moderator Yesung looked up at her with barely hidden impatience. The chair recognizes the Earth observer. Please be brief. Minji stood up, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet chamber. Thank you, moderator. I have one question about these territories you plan to colonize. She paused, looking down at the sea of faces turned toward her. Most looked bored or irritated. A few seemed curious about what the human might say. Has anyone done detailed biological scans of these star systems to check for existing intelligent life? The question hung in the air before Senator Kazthul responded with clear impatience. Our surveys detected no spacefaring civilizations. Standard protocols were followed. I see, Minji said carefully. What defines a spacefaring civilization in your surveys? Any species capable of faster-than-light travel, obviously, Kazthul replied. We search for warp signatures, quantum tunneling technology, hyperspace generators, and similar indicators of advanced space travel. Minji nodded slowly and made more notes on her tablet. Thank you for that clarification. I have no further questions at this time. She sat back down, ignoring the confused looks and quiet conversations her questions had started throughout the chamber. Most delegates seemed to consider her inquiry a waste of time. Why would primitive civilizations matter when discussing galactic expansion? But Minji was already composing a message on her tablet. Earth's new quantum communication system could send information across the galaxy almost instantly. There were people who needed to know about this conversation, and they needed to know soon. As the session continued around her, she worked quietly in her back row seat, invisible to the powerful delegates planning to reshape the galaxy. They had put her in the back to keep her out of sight. They had no idea she was exactly where she needed to be. 3 days passed before Minji could get formal speaking time. She had submitted her request through the proper channels and waited while the council processed it. When approval finally came, She was given 15 minutes at the end of the day, when most delegates would be leaving for dinner. The council chamber looked different in the evening. Half the seats were empty. Many of the important delegates had already gone to their social gatherings and private meetings. The ones who remained seemed tired and impatient. Most were checking their communication devices or talking quietly with their assistants. Minji walked down from her back row seat to the central speaking platform. Her footsteps echoed in the large chamber. She could feel the eyes of the remaining delegates on her as she made the long journey to the center of the room. She had spent the past 3 days working almost without sleep. Her small quarters in the visitor section of the station were cramped and noisy, but she had access to Earth's quantum communication network. She had been sending and receiving messages constantly. At the speaking platform, Minji activated her personal holographic display. The image that appeared showed detailed star charts of the outer spiral territories. But these charts were different from the ones Senator Castle had shown 3 days earlier. They contained much more information. "Honored delegates," Minji began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "I have completed an independent analysis of the outer spiral territories that you plan to colonize." Her display zoomed in on specific star systems. Red markers appeared on dozens of planets. Each marker pulsed with data about energy signatures, atmospheric compositions, and electromagnetic patterns. "I have identified 47 inhabited systems in the proposed expansion zone," she continued. "These civilizations may not have faster-than-light travel, but they show clear signs of advanced technology and complex societies. 12 of them have early space exploration programs." A few delegates looked up from their devices with mild interest. Most continued their side conversations or prepared to leave. The Velkari delegate Hyomin, who was filling in for Senator Castle that evening, barely glanced at her display. "As we stated before, we are only concerned with spacefaring threats. Pre-FTL civilizations are considered manageable." "Manageable," Minji repeated, her voice carrying an edge that made several delegates pause. "I see. And if one of these manageable civilizations proves to be less manageable than expected?" Hyomin waved a crystalline appendage dismissively. "Then they will be managed accordingly." The casual tone sent a chill through Minji. She had heard similar language during her military service when discussing targets that needed to be eliminated. "I have detailed information about each of these civilizations," she said, gesturing to her display. "The Corvani system has a species that has developed advanced energy manipulation. They can power entire cities with technology your surveys would not detect. The Shelter system contains a civilization that has mastered biological engineering. They have created living ships that grow instead of being built." She paused and looked around the chamber. A few more delegates were paying attention now, but most still seemed bored. "The Thanari system has a species that communicates through quantum entanglement across their entire planet. They achieved unified global consciousness 300 years ago. The Vexus system contains a civilization that has learned to manipulate gravity without mechanical devices." Hyomin interrupted her with obvious annoyance. "These are impressive claims, but irrelevant. None of these species pose a threat to galactic civilization. They lack the technology to leave their home systems." "Do they?" Minji asked quietly. She activated a new section of her display. This showed energy readings and spatial distortions that her analysis had detected in the outer spiral region. "I have identified several phenomena in these territories that do not match any known natural occurrence. Energy patterns that suggest manipulation of spacetime on a massive scale, gravitational anomalies that appear and disappear in regular cycles, quantum fluctuations that seem to carry information across impossible distances." For the first time, she had the attention of most of the remaining delegates. Even Hyomin was looking at her display with interest. "What are you suggesting?" asked the Thakran moderator who was running the evening session. "I am suggesting that our definition of spacefaring civilization may be too narrow," Minji replied. "We look for ships that travel faster than light. But what if there are civilizations that have learned to bring distant places to themselves, instead of traveling to those places?" Nervous murmurs spread through the chamber. The concept was not entirely unknown in galactic science, but the technology required was considered theoretical at best. Even if such technology existed, Hyoman said, it would require massive energy sources and computational power beyond anything a pre-FTL civilization could achieve. Minji smiled slightly. Unless they developed along different technological paths than we did, unless they focused on understanding the fundamental nature of space and time instead of building bigger engines. She changed her display again. This time it showed a compilation of all her data about the outer spiral territories. The image was complex and beautiful, showing energy flows and connections between star systems that formed intricate patterns. I formally request that these findings be entered into the official record, she said. I also request that Earth's position be noted as strongly opposing this expansion until proper diplomatic contact is established with existing inhabitants. The Thakran moderator looked uncomfortable. Your request is noted. However, the expansion vote was already approved. Colonial fleets can begin deployment within 90 days. I understand the vote has been taken, Minji said calmly. I am simply ensuring that when future historians review this decision, they will know that at least one voice tried to warn you. She deactivated her display and gathered her materials. As she walked back toward her seat, she heard amused comments from several delegates about the concerned little human and her wild theories about hidden civilizations. One Velkari delegate laughed openly. Perhaps the humans think these primitive species will welcome them as liberators when the expansion begins. Another added, it is touching how the newcomers worry about such things. They will learn that galactic civilization requires difficult choices. Minji reached her seat and sat down quietly. The remaining business of the evening was completed quickly. Most delegates were eager to get to their dinner appointments and social events. As the chamber emptied, Minji remained in her seat and opened her tablet. She had several new messages waiting through the quantum communication network. The responses to her earlier transmissions had arrived. The first message was from Earth's diplomatic corps, acknowledging her report and authorizing her to proceed with additional protocols if necessary. The second message was from a source that was not listed in any official Earth database. The message was short and written in a human language, but it came from somewhere in the direction of the outer spiral territories. We have received your warning about the expansion plans. The Guardians are aware and are preparing appropriate responses. Continue your work at the Council. Make sure everything is officially recorded. What happens next needs to be clearly documented. The message was signed with a name that made Minji's heart race. It was signed, Captain Ji-hoon Kim, New Seoul Colony Defense Force. New Seoul was one of the lost human colonies, ships that had left Earth over 200 years ago and were never heard from again. According to all official records, those colonies had failed, and the colonists had died. But apparently, at least some of them had not only survived, but had made contact with the civilizations in the outer spiral territories. Minji composed a careful reply and sent it through the quantum network. Then she began preparing for what she suspected would be a very interesting next few days. The major galactic powers thought they were about to claim undefended territory. They had ignored her warnings about advanced civilizations hiding in those star systems. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones you cannot see coming. The next morning brought crowds to the council chamber like Minji had never seen. Word of the final expansion vote had spread throughout the station. Even species not directly involved in the colonization plans had come to witness what many considered a historic moment. The chamber was completely full for the first time since Minji had arrived. Every seat from the prestigious front rows to the distant back sections was occupied. The air buzzed with excited conversations in dozens of languages. Minji sat in her usual spot in section Z99, watching the spectacle unfold below. The front rows glittered with the finest diplomatic clothing and ceremonial armor from across the galaxy. Senator Kazthul had returned and wore robes that seemed to contain actual starlight. The Thakran delegation displayed their formal war paint, patterns. Even the normally modest Nexari wore their ancient crown jewels. The vote itself was a formality. One by one, delegates rose to voice their support for the expansion. The resource projections were too attractive to ignore. The territories appeared too empty to cause concern. Each major power had already negotiated their share of the expected profits. When moderator Yesung called for opposition votes, the chamber fell silent. Then Minji stood up in the back row. Earth votes in opposition to this expansion, she said clearly. A few delegates turned to look at her with amusement. One actually laughed out loud. The single vote from a species not even granted full membership status was meaningless against the united will of the galactic powers. The motion passes by overwhelming majority, Yesung announced. Colonial fleets may begin deployment within the standard 90-day preparation period. The chamber erupted in celebration. Bottles of expensive drinks appeared in the front rows. Delegates congratulated each other on securing vast new territories for their civilizations. Holographic displays showed projected population growth and resource extraction timelines. Minji quietly gathered her things and left the chamber. No one noticed her departure. She had work to do. For the next 3 days, the station buzzed with preparation activity. Colonial fleet commanders arrived to receive their assignments. Shipping companies bid for transport contracts. Scientists planned research expeditions to catalog the resources of their new territories. The Velkari were especially active. Admiral Sunwoo arrived with his full staff to coordinate what would be the largest colonization effort in Velkari history. His flagship, the Crystal Dawn, was a massive vessel designed to establish forward bases for entire colony fleets. Minji watched it all from her quarters and from her back row seat during the daily council sessions. She sent regular reports through the quantum communication network and received increasingly urgent replies from sources she was not supposed to know existed. On the third day after the vote, everything changed. The first report came during the morning session. A junior aide rushed into the chamber and whispered urgently to moderator Yesung. The moderator's blue skin turned a noticeably paler shade. "I regret to interrupt the proceedings," Yesung announced, "but we have received a priority communication from Velkari High Command. Admiral Sunwoo's flagship has lost all contact with the fleet command." Confused murmurs filled the chamber. Senator Casthul stood up, his crystal body flickering with agitation. "What do you mean by lost contact?" The Crystal Dawn was conducting final preparations for departure when all communication ceased, Yesung replied. "Long-range sensors show no debris field. The ship has simply vanished from all detection systems." The murmurs grew louder. Ships did not simply vanish in civilized space. Even if destroyed, there would be wreckage, energy signatures, some trace of what had happened. Within hours, more reports arrived. A Thakran mining consortium preparing to survey asteroid fields in the outer spiral had disappeared during a routine hyperspace jump. A Nexari research station that had been monitoring energy patterns in the target region had gone completely silent. By evening, the pattern was clear and terrifying. Ships, stations, and installations belonging to species that had voted for the expansion were disappearing without explanation. Not destroyed, simply gone as if they had never existed. The council chamber was called into emergency session. The front rows, usually filled with confident delegates making grand speeches, now held nervous officials demanding answers that no one could provide. Security reports flew through the air as holographic displays. Each was more confusing than the last. The vanished vessels had been operating in completely different sectors of space. There was no common factor except their connection to the expansion plans. "This cannot be a coincidence," declared Hyomin, his crystalline form glowing with stress patterns. "These disappearances are clearly connected to the outer spiral expansion. We demand a full investigation and immediate military response." Other delegates voiced similar concerns. The Thakran called for war fleets to be dispatched to the outer spiral territories. The Nexari wanted their entire border fleet activated. Fear was replacing excitement throughout the chamber. From her back row seat, Minji watched the panic spread through the galactic powers. She had been receiving quantum communications all day, but she had not shared their contents with anyone. When moderator Yesung asked if any delegate had information relevant to the disappearances, she slowly stood up. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the small human in the back row, who had warned them about advanced civilizations in the expansion territories just days before. Ambassador Park, Yesung said, his voice tight with desperation. Do you have information that might explain these events? Minji walked slowly down to the central platform. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber as hundreds of beings watched her approach. When she reached the speaking position, she activated her personal display. I believe I can provide some clarity about what has happened to your missing people and ships, she said calmly. The display showed a detailed map of known space with the locations of the disappearances marked in red. Lines connected each vanishing point to specific star systems in the outer spiral territories. 3 days ago, I sent a detailed report about the expansion plans through Earth's quantum communication network, she continued. I transmitted this information to several parties, including diplomatic contacts that Earth has maintained with certain human colonies in the outer regions. Confused voices rose from the chamber. Earth was supposed to be a new species with no deep space colonies. You see, honored delegates, Earth's official first contact with galactic civilization occurred only recently. But humans have been traveling in deep space for much longer than most of you realize. Several colony ships left Earth over 200 years ago. We lost contact with them and assumed they had failed. She paused, looking out at the sea of worried faces. We were wrong. At least some of those colonies not only survived, but thrived. They established settlements in regions that galactic civilization had never explored. They made contact with the advanced civilizations I warned you about. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Minji continued speaking. When the human colony of New Seoul learned about your expansion plans, they contacted their neighbors in the outer spiral territories. These neighbors, who call themselves the Guardians, have been protecting pre-FTL civilizations in their region for over 1,000 years. Senator Casthol rose from his seat, his entire body blazing with fury. This is an act of war. Your primitive species has allied itself with hostile entities to attack legitimate galactic expansion efforts. Actually, Minji replied calmly, this is diplomacy. The Guardians could have destroyed your fleets and installations completely. Instead, they chose to demonstrate their capabilities in a way that harmed no one. She activated a new section of her display showing energy readings and spatial measurements. Your missing vessels and installations have not been destroyed. They have been relocated to a pocket dimension where they are being kept quite safely. The crews are unharmed and are probably learning some very interesting things about advanced physics. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates were shouting in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for emergency evacuations of their border territories. Minji waited for the noise to die down before continuing. I have been in continuous contact with both Earth's diplomatic corps and representatives of the Guardian Alliance for the past 18 hours. They have asked me to present their terms for the return of your people and property. The angry voices stopped. Every delegate in the chamber focused on the human they had dismissed and ignored just days before. The terms are simple, Minji said. First, immediate suspension of all expansion activities in the outer spiral territories. Second, formal recognition of the existing civilizations in those regions, regardless of their FTL capability. Third, establishment of proper diplomatic contact before any future expansion efforts. And if we refuse? Asked the Thakran moderator, his voice shaking with rage. Then your people will remain as guests of the Guardians indefinitely. Minji replied. They will be treated well, but they will not be returning home. Additionally, any further expansion attempts will result in more direct responses. She smiled slightly, the expression looking almost out of place in the tense chamber. The Guardians have been observing galactic civilization for quite some time. They know the location of every major melita. The emergency session lasted all night. Delegates who had been celebrating just days before now sat in worried groups, speaking in hushed voices about missing fleets and impossible technologies. The front rows of the chamber looked like a gathering of ghosts rather than the confident leaders of galactic civilization. Minji remained in her back row seat throughout the night, answering question after question from increasingly desperate officials. Her tablet never stopped receiving messages through the quantum communication network. Each transmission brought new information about the scope of what was happening across the galaxy. By morning, the full scale became clear. 63 major installations belonging to expansion-supporting species had vanished overnight. Colony fleets, mining stations, research facilities, and even some military outposts had simply disappeared from normal space-time. But the most shocking news came when Senator Casthul tried to contact Valkyrie High Command. The communication went through, but the response was not what anyone expected. "This is Admiral Sunwoo aboard the Crystal Dawn," came the transmission played for the entire chamber. "I want to report that my crew and I are being held in what our captors call a pocket dimension. We are unharmed and being treated well, but we are definitely not in normal space." The Admiral's voice sounded amazed rather than angry. "The beings holding us call themselves Guardians. They have shown us technologies that make our most advanced systems look like stone tools. They say they want to establish diplomatic relations with our civilizations, but only after we agree to respect the sovereignty of all intelligent species." The transmission continued with detailed descriptions of Guardian technology and their peaceful intentions. Other missing crews sent similar messages. All reported good treatment and incredible technological demonstrations, but none were being allowed to return home until the diplomatic terms were accepted. Moderator Yesung looked exhausted as he called for order in the increasingly chaotic chamber. "We need to discuss our response to these terms," he announced. "Response?" shouted Hyomin from the front row. "We are being held hostage by unknown entities working with a primitive species. This demands immediate military action." Other delegates voiced similar outrage. The Thakran called for the entire council fleet to be mobilized. The Nexari wanted to declare a state of galactic emergency. The smaller powers looked terrified at the thought of a war they could not understand. Minji stood up and walked back to the central platform. The chamber gradually fell silent as the delegates realized the human might have more information to share. "Before you make any decisions about military responses," she said calmly, "you should understand exactly what you would be fighting." She activated her display and showed a new set of star charts. These showed energy readings from across the galaxy, but the patterns were unlike anything the delegates had seen before. "The Guardians have been very helpful in explaining their capabilities," Minji continued. "They do not travel through space in the way we understand it. They manipulate the fundamental structure of space-time itself. Distance and location are essentially meaningless to them." The display zoomed in on specific readings. "They can observe any point in the galaxy instantly. They can move objects or beings across impossible distances without using any detectable energy. They can create pocket dimensions that exist outside normal physics." She paused and looked around the chamber. "More importantly, they have been watching galactic civilization develop for over 1,000 years. They know everything about your technologies, your military capabilities, your political structures, and your expansion patterns." Senator Casthul stood up, his crystal body flickering with stress patterns. "Even if their technology is advanced, they cannot have unlimited power. Every civilization has weaknesses that can be exploited." "Perhaps," Minji agreed. "But consider this. The Guardians have been protecting dozens of civilizations in the outer spiral territories for centuries. They have prevented invasions by species far more militarily advanced than current galactic civilization. They have done this without anyone even knowing they existed." She changed her display to show historical data that no galactic database contained. 300 years ago, the Krillian Empire tried to expand into Guardian territory. The Krillians had the most powerful military force in the galaxy at that time. Their entire civilization vanished overnight. Galactic historians assumed they destroyed themselves in a civil war. Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. The Krillian disappearance was legendary, but no one had ever connected it to unknown entities in the outer spiral. 200 years ago, the Zephyrian Collective attempted to strip mine several Guardian-protected worlds. The Zephyrians were master engineers who could reshape entire planets in months. They also vanished completely. Again, historians blamed internal conflicts. Minji looked directly at the most militant delegates. 7 more galactic powers have disappeared over the centuries after threatening Guardian territories. Each time, Galactic civilization assumed they had destroyed themselves through war or disaster. No one realized they had all made the same mistake you are considering. The chamber fell completely silent. The implications were staggering. If these guardians had been eliminating threats to their protected territories for centuries, without anyone realizing it, then galactic civilization had been living under their observation all along. "What do they want from us?" asked a small voice from the middle rows. It was Delegate Soyoung from the Peaceful Worlds Alliance, one of the few species that had opposed the expansion from the beginning. Minji smiled at the question. "They want to stop hiding. The Guardians are tired of watching galactic powers repeat the same patterns of conquest and exploitation. They want to establish open diplomatic relations and share their technologies with civilizations that prove they can coexist peacefully with others." She activated a new section of her display, showing scientific data that made several delegates gasp in amazement. They can provide clean, unlimited energy that requires no fuel or infrastructure. They can share medical technologies that can extend lifespans by thousands of years. They can teach space-time manipulation that would make faster than light travel seem primitive. The potential benefits were incredible, but the conditions were clear. However, Minji continued, they will only work with civilizations that abandon conquest-based expansion. Species that want Guardian technology must prove they can coexist with pre-FTL civilizations instead of conquering them. Delegate after delegate began asking questions about the specifics of Guardian requirements. The conversation was shifting from military response to diplomatic possibility. But not everyone was convinced. Hyomin stood up again, his crystalline form blazing with anger. "This is nothing but elaborate blackmail. We are being forced to abandon our legitimate expansion rights by threats from unknown entities hiding behind a primitive species." He gestured dramatically toward Minji. "How do we even know this human is telling the truth? How do we know these so-called Guardians are not simply human allies using advanced technology to threaten galactic civilization?" Before Minji could respond, the chamber's communication systems activated on their own. No one had sent a signal, but suddenly every screen and holographic display in the room showed the same image. It was a being unlike anything anyone in the chamber had ever seen. Its form seemed to shift between energy and matter, sometimes appearing solid and sometimes looking like living starlight. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. "Greetings, members of the Galactic Council," the being said. "I am Harmony, speaking for the Guardian Alliance. Ambassador Park has represented our position accurately. We offer cooperation and shared advancement to any civilization willing to respect the sovereignty of all intelligent life." The chamber was frozen in shocked silence. The being continued speaking with a voice that somehow conveyed both infinite patience and absolute power. "Your missing personnel will be returned unharmed when you accept our diplomatic terms. We do not wish conflict, but we will not allow the conquest of our protected territories to continue." The image shifted to show brief glimpses of Guardian civilization. Cities that floated in space without visible support. Beings of pure energy working alongside physical entities. Technologies that seem to operate through will rather than mechanical force. "We have waited long enough for galactic civilization to mature beyond conquest," Harmony said. "Ambassador Park's people have shown us that some species can evolve, past the need to dominate others. We hope you will prove equally capable of growth." The image faded, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. Minji looked out at the stunned delegates and spoke quietly. "The choice is still yours, but now you know exactly who you would be choosing to fight." For the first time since arriving at the station, she had the complete attention of every being in the chamber. The small human in the back row had just introduced them to powers beyond their imagination. The front rows were no longer filled with confident leaders planning conquest. They were filled with beings who had just realized that the galaxy was far more complex and dangerous than they had ever imagined. The council chamber remained silent for a full minute after the Guardian communication ended. Delegates sat frozen in their seats, staring at the displays that had just shown them a glimpse of power beyond their understanding. Moderator Ye Sung was the first to recover his voice. "Ambassador Park, he said carefully. Can you establish direct communication with these guardians? Minji nodded and activated her tablet. Within seconds, the familiar shifting image of Harmony appeared on the central holographic display. We are ready to discuss terms, the Guardian representative said, its voice still coming from every direction at once. But first, we wish to clarify the situation for all present. The display changed to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems were marked with different colored indicators. The yellow markers show civilizations under Guardian protection, Harmony explained. These are species that have not yet developed faster than light travel, but have achieved complex societies and technology. We have prevented their conquest or destruction for over 12 centuries. There were far more yellow markers than anyone had expected. Hundreds of inhabited systems that galactic civilization had never detected or had dismissed as unimportant. The blue markers show civilizations that have achieved interstellar travel, but have chosen to respect the sovereignty of others. These species are welcome in Guardian space and have access to our technologies and knowledge. Only a few dozen systems were marked in blue. Most delegates were shocked to see that their own civilizations were not among them. The red markers show civilizations that have been removed from the galaxy due to persistent aggressive expansion against protected worlds. The red markers numbered in the dozens, representing entire galactic powers that had vanished from history. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Where do we fit in this system? Asked Senator Kazthul, his voice much quieter than usual. That depends entirely on your choices in the coming days, Harmony replied. We offer 3 possible paths forward. A new display appeared showing detailed terms and conditions. Path 1 is immediate acceptance of our sovereignty over the outer, spiral territories. All expansion activities in those regions cease permanently. In exchange, your missing personnel and installations will be returned within 24 hours. Galactic civilization continues as before, but with clearly defined boundaries. Murmurs of discussion began throughout the chamber. This was the minimal option, requiring the least change but offering no benefits beyond the return of their people. Path 2 is formal diplomatic recognition of Guardian authority and the establishment of peaceful relations. Species choosing this path gain limited access to Guardian technologies, particularly in medicine and energy production. In exchange, you must demonstrate respect for pre-FTL civilizations by establishing protective protocols similar to our own. The potential benefits of Guardian technology had every delegate's attention. Medical advances that could extend lifespans indefinitely. Energy systems that could power entire worlds without resources or pollution. The advantages were incredible. Path 3 is full alliance with the Guardian network. Species choosing this path gain complete access to our technologies, including space-time manipulation and dimensional engineering. In exchange, you become active protectors of developing civilizations and help us expand the protected zones throughout the galaxy. The chamber erupted in excited conversations. The technologies offered under Path 3 would revolutionize galactic civilization. But the requirements would also completely change how expansion and colonization worked. Delegate So Young from the Peaceful Worlds Alliance stood up. What about species that are already following policies similar to your protection requirements? My people have never conquered pre-FTL civilizations. Harmony's form shifted in what might have been a smile. The Peaceful Worlds Alliance is already classified as a blue marker civilization. You are welcome in Guardian space immediately and qualify for Path 2 benefits without additional requirements. Similar questions came from other smaller species. Many of the galactic powers were surprised to learn that several civilizations had already been secretly trading with Guardian-protected worlds for decades, but the major powers faced much more difficult decisions. Their entire economies were based on expansion and resource extraction. Their military forces were designed for conquest. Accepting Guardian terms would require fundamental changes to their societies. This is impossible, declared Hyomen. The Felkari Republic has over 400 colony worlds and 3,000 industrial installations. Our entire civilization is built on controlled expansion. We cannot simply stop growing. You can continue growing, Harmony replied patiently. But growth through conquest must end. Growth through cooperation, trade, and voluntary alliance is encouraged and supported. Minji stood up to address the chamber. The Guardians are not asking you to stop being who you are. They are asking you to become better versions of yourselves. She activated her own display, showing economic and social projections. Earth's analysis suggests that Guardian technologies would actually accelerate galactic development. Unlimited clean energy eliminates resource competition. Advanced medicine reduces population pressures. Space-time manipulation makes transportation costs almost zero. The projections showed galactic civilizations growing faster and further under Guardian alliance than they ever had through conquest. The question is not whether you can afford to accept these terms, Minji continued. The question is whether you can afford to refuse them. More hours of debate followed. Delegates contacted their home governments for instructions. Military leaders were consulted about the feasibility of fighting beings who could manipulate space-time itself. Economists calculated the potential benefits of Guardian technology. As the discussions continued, more Guardian representatives appeared on the communication displays. Each was different, representing various species within the Guardian Alliance. Some looked similar to known galactic races. Others were completely alien. A few appeared to be pure energy beings. One representative that caught everyone's attention looked almost human. When it spoke, it did so in perfect galactic standard language. I am Captain Ji-hoon Kim of the New Seoul Defense Force, the figure said. My people left Earth over 200 years ago. We have been part of the Guardian Alliance for 150 years. Senator Casthol leaned forward. Your technology levels when you left Earth were primitive by galactic standards. How did you achieve Guardian Alliance status? We proved that humans could coexist peacefully with other intelligences, Captain Kim replied. When we discovered the first Guardian-protected world, we chose to establish diplomatic relations instead of attempting conquest. That decision led to everything we have achieved since. He gestured to something outside the camera's view. New Seoul now has a population of over 50 million across 12 worlds. We have lifespans of several thousand years. We can travel instantly between any points in the galaxy. We have all of this because we chose cooperation over conquest. The implications were staggering. A human colony using primitive Earth technology had achieved more in 2 centuries than most galactic civilizations had in millennia. As the day ended, Moderator Yesung called for a preliminary vote on how to proceed. The results would determine whether galactic civilization moved toward alliance or conflict with powers beyond their current understanding. We will vote on 3 questions, Yesung announced. First, do we accept Guardian sovereignty over the outer spiral territories? Second, do we pursue formal diplomatic relations with the Guardian Alliance? Third, do we authorize individual species to negotiate separate agreements with the Guardians? The votes would not be binding, but they would show the direction galactic civilization was willing to take. As delegates prepared to cast their votes, Minji looked around the chamber. The front rows were no longer filled with confident conquerors planning expansion. They were filled with beings trying to understand their place in a galaxy that had suddenly become much larger and more complex. The small human in the back row had introduced them to a future they had never imagined possible. When the votes were counted, the results surprised everyone. The first question passed overwhelmingly. Even the most militant species voted to recognize Guardian sovereignty over the outer spiral, rather than face the possibility of their entire civilizations vanishing overnight. The second question was closer but still passed by a significant margin. The potential benefits of Guardian technology were too valuable to ignore, and the alternative of remaining forever locked out of advanced development was unacceptable. The third question passed, unanimously. Every species wanted the option to negotiate their own relationship with the Guardian Alliance, based on their individual circumstances and capabilities. As the session ended, delegates began approaching Minji with requests for Earth to help facilitate their communications with the Guardians. The human who had been ignored and dismissed just days before was suddenly the most important diplomatic contact in the galaxy. Ambassador Park, Senator Castle said as he approached her seat, The Velkari Republic would be honored to have Earth's assistance in establishing formal relations with the Guardian Alliance. Similar requests came from delegation after delegation. 1 month later, the Galactic Council chamber looked completely different. The front rows, once filled with the most powerful delegates in the galaxy, sat mostly empty. Many of the major powers were still negotiating with the Guardians for the return of their missing fleets and installations. But the middle and back sections buzzed with more activity than ever before. Representatives from dozens of previously ignored civilizations had been invited to participate in the new diplomatic order. Species that had been dismissed as primitive or irrelevant were now sharing technologies and perspectives that amazed their supposedly more advanced neighbors. Minji had been offered a seat in the prestigious front rows. Earth's role in facilitating the Guardian Alliance had earned humanity full membership status and recognition as a major diplomatic power. But she had chosen to remain in her back row seat in section Z99. "The view is better from here," she had told moderator Ye Sung when he asked about her seating preference. "I can see everything that is really happening." Today marked the formal establishment of the Outer Spiral Diplomatic Council, a new body that would oversee relations between traditional galactic civilization and the Guardian Alliance. Representatives from over 200 species filled the chamber, including many that most delegates had never heard of before. The Guardian representative Harmony maintained a constant presence through the holographic communication system. Its shifting form of energy and matter had become a familiar sight over the past month. Other Guardian representatives appeared regularly to answer questions and provide guidance about the new diplomatic protocols. Captain Ji-hoon Kim of New Seoul had arrived in person 2 weeks earlier. His ship, which looked like a work of art more than a vehicle, had amazed the station's engineers. It operated on principles that made faster-than-light travel seem primitive by comparison. "Ambassador Park," Captain Kim said as he approached her seat before the session began, "I wanted to thank you personally for making this possible. When we received your first message about the expansion plans, we were not sure how galactic civilization would respond to Guardian intervention." Minji smiled. "Honestly, I was not sure either, but I knew that someone had to try to prevent what would have been a disaster for everyone involved. The Guardians are impressed with Earth's diplomatic approach," he continued. "They are considering offering humanity a fast track to full alliance status." Around them, the chamber filled with beings from across the galaxy. But these were not the same confident conquerors who had gathered to plan expansion just a month before. These were representatives learning to navigate a galaxy where cooperation was more valuable than conquest. The session began with a report from the Guardian Implementation Committee. Species after species stood to announce their progress in meeting Guardian requirements for various levels of alliance. The Peaceful Worlds Alliance had been immediately accepted into full Guardian partnership. Their technologies were already being shared throughout their region, leading to dramatic improvements in living standards and environmental restoration. Several smaller civilizations had qualified for Path 2 status, gaining access to Guardian, medical and energy technologies in exchange for establishing protection protocols for pre-FTL worlds in their regions. Even some of the major powers were making progress. The Velkari Republic had agreed to convert their entire colonial system from conquest-based expansion to cooperative development. In exchange, they would receive Guardian space-time manipulation technology that would allow them to create new, habitable worlds instead of taking existing ones. The Thakran Confederation wishes to report successful implementation of Guardian mining protocols, announced Delegate Minho, who had replaced the more aggressive representatives who had originally planned the outer spiral expansion. "We have begun extracting resources from uninhabited systems using Guardian-provided technology that is both more efficient and completely environmentally sustainable." Similar progress reports came from civilizations throughout the galaxy. The transition was not easy, but the benefits were becoming undeniable. Species that adopted Guardian methods were achieving growth and development that far exceeded what they had accomplished through conquest. But the most dramatic change was in the representation itself. For the first time in galactic history, pre-FTL civilizations had voices in interstellar politics. "I speak for the Corvani Energy Collective," said a being whose appearance was entirely new to most delegates. "We thank the Guardian Alliance for protecting our world during our development phase. We are now ready to contribute our energy manipulation techniques to the broader galactic community. The Thanari Unified Consciousness sends greetings through quantum entanglement," came another voice, though no physical representative was present. "We offer our communication technologies to help connect civilizations across impossible distances." World after world that had been marked for conquest was instead becoming a valued partner in galactic development. Technologies that had been unknown were revolutionizing entire industries. Medical advances were extending lifespans across dozens of species. As the reports continued, Minji noticed that many of the remaining delegates from the major powers kept glancing toward her back row seat. The human who had warned them about Guardian protection was now the unofficial coordinator for much of the new diplomatic activity. When the formal reports ended, Harmony addressed the chamber directly. "The Guardian Alliance is pleased with the progress of galactic civilization," the energy being said. "More species have qualified for advanced partnership in the past month than in the previous century. This suggests that your civilizations were ready for this transition and simply needed the proper encouragement." The shifting form paused before continuing. "However, we must address the civilizations that have chosen to reject Guardian partnership entirely." A new display appeared showing several star systems marked in red. These were the holdout powers that had refused to accept any Guardian terms and had attempted to maintain their conquest-based expansion policies. "The Drakmori Empire has continued aggressive expansion against 3 Guardian-protected worlds despite repeated warnings," Harmony reported. "As of this morning, the Drakmori civilization has been relocated to a quarantine dimension where they cannot threaten others." Shocked silence filled the chamber. An entire galactic power had been removed from existence in a matter of hours. The Mao, Syrian dominance and the Kresh military alliance have suffered similar fates after refusing to cease conquest activities. Harmony continued. "We do not take these actions lightly, but the protection of developing civilizations must be maintained." The message was clear. The Guardian Alliance was willing to work with any civilization that showed genuine commitment to peaceful coexistence. But those who insisted on conquest would simply disappear. "Are there any questions about Guardian policies or requirements?" Harmony asked. Delegate Soyoung stood up in the middle section. "The Peaceful Worlds Alliance wishes to propose expansion of the protection protocols to include additional categories of vulnerable civilizations." "Please elaborate," Harmony replied. "We have identified several post-FTL species that are still vulnerable to conquest by more advanced powers. Perhaps the protection system could be extended to include civilizations that have achieved interstellar travel, but lack the military capability to defend themselves against major galactic powers." It was a radical suggestion that would fundamentally change how galactic politics operated. Instead of might making right, the new system would protect the weak and encourage development through cooperation rather than conquest. "The Guardian Alliance finds this proposal interesting," Harmony said after a moment. "We will establish a trial program in 3 sectors and evaluate the results." More proposals followed. A system for sharing technologies between civilizations at different development levels. Protocols for joint exploration of uncharted regions. Frameworks for resolving disputes without military action. Each suggestion was carefully considered by the Guardian representatives and often approved for implementation. The galaxy was being restructured from a collection of competing empires into a cooperative network of allied civilizations. As the session neared its end, moderator Yisung stood to make a closing announcement. "This council formally recognizes the establishment of the Guardian Alliance as the primary diplomatic authority for interstellar relations. The age of conquest is officially ended. The age of cooperation has begun." The chamber erupted in applause from hundreds of species. But Minji noticed that the loudest approval came from the middle and back rows, where the smaller civilizations sat. The front rows, where the major powers had once planned to divide up the galaxy among themselves, were now largely empty. After the session ended, delegates approached Minji with requests for assistance in Guardian negotiations. Earth's diplomatic corps had become the most sought-after intermediary in the galaxy, Ambassador Park, said Delegate Jae-hyun from the Nexari Alliance. Our people would be honored if Earth would help us establish formal relations with the new Sol colony. We believe our scientific capabilities could complement their Guardian technologies. The Velkari Republic requests Earth's guidance in restructuring our colonial administration to meet Guardian standards, added Hyomin, whose attitude had shown